Hi everyone, this is Stjepan. Liren and Wesley so finished early in round 10 of the candidates tournament, which I can't say I'm too excited about. Ding had the white pieces and he managed to draw his 10th game in a row now. That is incredibly unlikely and I'm sure his play has definitely been the decisive reason for that. And in today's game, as in most games from the previous rounds, he didn't really show a fighting spirit, nor he was too eager to win, it seems, and not even with the white pieces, which is the worst of all. So he is now at 50% with only 4 rounds to go, which probably means he now only stands a theoretical chance to win the tournament. And Wesley saw his opponent in today's game, who hadn't had the best tournament of his life, was at 3.5 points out of 9 before round 10 with a less than ideal performance, and he also doesn't really stand a chance for the victory. In this game, Liren kicked off with pawn to d4, and we have d5 by Wesley, the first symmetrical queen-pawn opening in the tournament, not going for knight f6, c4, e6, and Wesley plays the queen's gambit declined, knight to c3, bishop to e7, which is perhaps a bit uncommon move, knight to f3, knight to f6, and bishop to f4, and this is the so-called Harrwitz Attack variation of the queen's gambit declined. In this position, Wesley saw castles, we have e3, b6, he prepares to fianchetto his light squared bishop, c takes d5, Ding resolves the central pawn tension before the bishop is developed to b7, which might be important in the upcoming variations, because if he did it a few moves later, the bishop would have also been able to recapture on d5, which I'm not saying is important, but it might have been. Knight takes d5 by Wesley, knight takes, queen takes, and in this position Liren's king is a bit unsafe, and especially vulnerable to checks from the b4 and the a4 square. I'm sorry, the a5 square. So the most precise move was to play a3 here, which would take away both checking squares from Wesley so, but he chooses to develop his bishop first. And another thing worth mentioning is that the c7 pawn is hanging in this position, and taking it gives a slight edge to black, but it could be taken without severe consequences. But Ding plays bishop to e2 here, developing first before grabbing the pawn or doing anything else, bishop to b7, and in this position he does indeed capture on c7, he takes with bishop takes c7. It is a free pawn, but it allows Wesley to gain a lot of initiative in exchange, and the position is however still almost completely equal as the material compensates for black's activity. Wesley now checks with queen to a5 check, knight to d2 covering the check would be of course a huge blunder, because Wesley could take on g2 with the bishop, so he just moves the king to f1, and it's also worth mentioning that covering with the queen would also be inferior, because after queen takes d2, if knight takes, once again g2 is falling, and if king takes, then white is forfeiting his castling rights, and the king isn't really that safe in the center, so it was much better to just simply retreat it to f1. Knight to d7 by Wesley, developing his knight, h4, an aggressive move by Liren, starting a kingside attack, but it's not really going anywhere yet. Rook a to c8, chasing the bishop away, and it retreats to f4. Rook f to d8, developing the second rook to the semi-open file, king to g1, Ding decides to bring the king to a bit more safety, and in this position Wesley decides to go for a plan of pushing e5, which would gain space and even more activity, and to do that he reasons that he has to give up the bishop pair, and he takes with bishop takes f3. And it was a great move in this position actually, but I'm not sure that most players would even consider giving up the strong b7 bishop here. Bishop takes on f3 and e5 now, resolving the central tension and breaking up white's formidable pawn structure with d4, e3 and f2, and attacking the bishop of course, and Liren plays the best move in this position, but it looks incredibly risky actually, and it's not immediately clear why it works and why it doesn't lose immediately. He plays bishop to g5. And the obvious question here is, why can't black just trap the bishop with pawn to f6? And if he had played f6 here, the move white would have to save the position would be queen to b3 check, checking the king, and the king has two squares. It could go to h8 or to f8. If it goes to h8, then the move which would be almost winning for white is queen to f7, and if pawn takes g5, then just queen takes f7, winning. And after queen to b3, if the king goes to f8, then bishop to h5, black isn't able to capture the bishop on g5 because he would hang mate on f7, a mate in one move. So after g6 covering the check, just bishop to h6 check, and white is almost completely winning. So after bishop to g5, it's amazing that Wesley managed to calculate all the variations, and he played bishop takes g5, not going for any of that. H takes g, and now e takes d4 by Wesley. So queen takes d4 and queen takes g5. And the material is equal, but white stands a bit better because his queen is more active. He has the open h file for his rook, which is important if any attacking possibilities could occur. And here he plays rook to h5, gaining an important tempo on the queen. It retreats to f6. Rook to d5, defending the queen on d4 to make sure he wouldn't have to recapture with the pawn, which would ruin his pawn structure. And here Wesley so decides to exchange the queens, which it was the best move in this position because white's pieces would have been much more active along the d-file, but if he had wanted an attacking game, then he could have played something else. The position wouldn't be that much worse or losing by any means. So queen takes d4, rook takes d4, knight to e5, attacking the bishop. It goes to d5, attacking the weak f7 square. Knight to c6, forcing the rook back to d1, as retreating it anywhere else on the third or the second rank would mean that black would always have tactical possibilities. So rook d to d1, king to f8, getting away from the pin by the bishop on the f7 pawn. And now bishop takes c6. Of course, black can't just take the bishop because he would hang the d8 rook with check. So rook takes d1 first, an intermezzo move, rook takes d1 and rook takes c6. And this is now just a complete draw, which is unfortunate since the position was actually just starting to get exciting before the pieces and the queens got traded. But Wesley had to trade queens because Ding would have had a lot of attacking possibilities with the queen and rook on the d-file, and the game is just drawing now. A few more moves were played. We have rook to d7, rook to c2. Both players attack the pawns on the second and the seventh rank. Rook takes a4, saving the a pawn. Rook to a2 attacking, rook to b7, rook to a1 check, king h2, and now they exchange the prisoners, as Nimzowitsch would say, rook takes a4, rook takes b6, and here they agree to a draw. And this is definitely not a result both players wished for, but I still believe that they are the ones to blame. They showed almost no true fighting spirit, and perhaps they still have time to at least prove their worth in the candidates tournament, since they have almost no chance of winning now. Okay everyone, thanks very much for watching and stay tuned for more chess from the candidates, as I will be covering all the games. Cheers, bye!